So, all right. So thank you for being here. This is the 5th edition of the now famous Travel and Immigration Restriction webinar organized by the Belgian American Chamber of the South. With vaccination campaign coming into full speed, or has been already in full speed, with major parts of the world being at 50% vaccinated. Things have shifted again also in Belgium and the UE and European Union, and hopefully also in the US. Teri might have some breaking news. I also want to thank our members without whom the Chamber could not operate. Our VIP member UCB, one of Belgium's largest medical companies, also involved in the fight against this virus, with headquarters in the US in Atlanta, Georgia. Our Diamond member, Van Herstal, world leader in the defense industry and sporting guns, and GWLA Real Estate, founded by Piet and Sabine Dosche. And then Solvay, one of the oldest and best known chemical companies of Belgium. Our platinum members, Beauflor, the US flooring division of Beaulieu International Group, ONP Supply Chain Solutions with our board member, Philippe Vervroesen, Epic Broker Insurances with our board member, Christophe Van Hol, Balta US, the US rug division of Balta, BACoS, specialized in steel wires, and BACoS, inspired site and sharing solutions. Our gold members, Beauplan Safety Rail Systems, Navigator Consulting with board member Jim Blair, Aprio, certified public accountants, Alston and Bird lawyers, Marilek food processing solutions, Decospan Total Wood Solutions, and Arnold Golden Gregory with Teri Simmons, which I will have the pleasure to introduce a little bit later on. Also, we have an intro level for small businesses, up to 4 people, Tula Executive Search, Isabel Gibson, Realtor with Harry Norman, and Executive Chef Philippe Haddad. As you can hear, we have sponsored level for all sizes of companies, and hence the world will open again. We'll do in-person events very soon, and add on even more volume to the business community in Atlanta. I also would like to add that please keep your agendas open for the evening of the 4th of October, as the Belgian American Chamber of Commerce will do a major event at the trade mission of the Royal Trade Mission to Atlanta. Would like to start with a warm welcome to Atlanta for Miss Eline Goovaerts, who is the new Deputy Head of Mission of the Belgian Consulate General in Atlanta. Ms. Goovaerts has a master's degree in international law and LLM in humanitarian rights, obtained at the Geneva Academy. She specialized further in international law by working for the Commissioner General for Refugees and Stateless Persons in Belgium, before joining the Belgian diplomacy in 2020. This is her first mission overseas. Ms. Teri Simmons is a partner at Arnold Golden Gregory in Atlanta, where she directs the international practice group and the immigration practice. Ms. Simmons is also an adjunct professor for business immigration law at University of Georgia School of Law. She represents companies as law. Atlanta Olympic Games are already a long time over, but that's a very nice referral, for which she managed thousands of visas, but she was also able to help on daily basis many small, medium-sized businesses, like already she has helped many of our members. She has spent a part of her life in Europe and is also eager to be able to travel again. I am Karl Thybergin, Strategic Account Manager International at Mohawk Industries and a board member of BACoS. I will be moderating this debate. Ms. Goovaerts will start, followed by Ms. Simmons. After the presentation, there will be a time for questions and answers. During the presentation, don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat box. Eline, up to you. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much, Karel, and thank you for the eloquent introduction. As Karl said, my name is Eline Goovaerts. I am the Deputy Head of Mission and the Consul here at the Consulate General of Belgium in Atlanta. And I'm made a short PowerPoint presentation, so I'm going to try and share my screen. Let's hope that works. Can you see it?
Yep.
Okay. Okay. So.
Can you put it on full screen, Eline, please?
Yeah. Yeah. Is it better now?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So this will be a short presentation on the COVID-19 travel updates for travel to Belgium. Since the last webinar we organized, or BACoS organized in March, the COVID-19 situation has really changed for the better, at least in the US and the EU currently. Vaccine rates both in Europe and the US have strongly risen, with 67% of US adults now vaccinated with a first dose, and COVID cases at a very low rate, especially compared to a few months ago. We see a very broadly similar picture here in the EU. As you see on the map, most of the EU is now colored green, which means that both...
Eline, can you please go to the next slide? Because, sorry for interrupting, but it's stuck on the first slide.
Now?
I think you might have to reload.
Okay, let me stop share. Hang on. Let me start again, okay?
Yeah.
All right. Now?
No, you're stuck on the first slide.
Oh, okay. We tried it this weekend and it worked fine, which is typical, I would say. Maybe if I share my screen.
Yes, there we go.
Is that better?
That's perfect.
Do you see it now, the situation in the EU?
Yes.
All right.
Go ahead.
Okay. So as I was saying, most of the EU, with exceptions in Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and some other countries, are currently green, which means that both the positivity rate and the 14-day cases have been fairly low over the last 14 days, which is great news. Very similar situation in Belgium, which currently has a very low case rate. We're averaging around 400 cases a day. But that's also because we are very broadly testing people, as in Europe, you still very often need a test for traveling within the EU or abroad. So we're also catching a lot of positive cases, which is a good sign. Hospitalization rates are currently also very low. And of course, this is connected to the next slide, the vaccination rates in Belgium. Belgium is currently actually the fastest country in the EU when it comes to the number of corona vaccines which are being administered per 100 inhabitants. We're on track to fully vaccinate the whole population by the end of the summer or September, with 60 or 61% of adults having received one shot currently and 33% fully vaccinated. As most of you know, Belgium pursued a campaign whereby the most vulnerable were vaccinated first. So it's really a good sign that we have such high rates already, which means a large part of the population who is vulnerable is now fully travel to Belgium. What are currently the rules in place? For Belgians or EU citizens who are traveling to Belgium, since the beginning or the mid of April, travel to Belgium is once again allowed for any reason possible. Currently, there is no requirement for a PCR test or for a quarantine when you arrive in Belgium. However, it's important when you refer back to that color-coded map. Belgium is using colors to determine the risk level of a country. So currently, the US is considered green. Last week, the US was still considered orange. And so the requirements for PCR testing and quarantine are linked to the color of the country. So currently the US is green. There are no requirements for testing or quarantine. But again, this may change if the color code changes. So if you're not traveling in the next few weeks, but you're traveling later in the year or in August, definitely check the color before you travel, because it does change the requirements for the test and the quarantine. What is still required at the moment is to fill in the passenger locator form, maximum 48 hours in advance of your travel, which means your check-in for your first flight back to Europe. The link can be found on the website of the Belgian Embassy, and it's on the slide here as well. Or if you just Google passenger locator form Belgium, you will also find it. So that's Belgians and EU citizens. What are the rules for US citizens or residents here in the US traveling to Belgium? Actually, currently, the rules are the same. Travel to Belgium is allowed for any reason. You no longer need an essential travel reason or an essential travel certificate to prove the nature of your travel. Currently, there is also no requirement for a PCR test or a quarantine when you arrive in Belgium. Once again, as explained before, this may change if the color code of the US changes. So check before your travel what the color code of the US is at that time. Finally, there is currently no requirement to prove your vaccination status for travel to Belgium. So while I would recommend you to take your CDC vaccination card if you are vaccinated, currently Belgium is not requiring it in order to travel. Finally, you will, of course, also have to fill in the passenger locator form maximum 48 hours in advance of your trip. Then, maybe you don't just want to travel to Belgium, you also want to travel within the EU. This is where it gets a little bit more complex at the moment. So we are receiving a lot of questions because of announcements in the news about EU vaccine passports, as they are being called, or COVID passports, for EU citizens and people having been vaccinated in the EU for traveling around the EU. So are these available to those vaccinated in the USA? Currently, unfortunately, no. In Belgium, there is no procedure yet for the recognition of the vaccine status outside of the EU. So if you've been vaccinated here in the US, there is no way to obtain this vaccine passport currently. Other EU states are requiring vaccination proof when traveling to that country. And most of them, or all of them, which are requiring vaccination proof, are accepting the CDC vaccination cards. So again, I would really recommend you, if you're traveling to Europe, to take that card with you if you have it. Also, different EU states, as all throughout the pandemic, have had different rules in place and different COVID regulations, both for Belgian citizens and US citizens and residents. So if you are thinking about traveling around Europe this summer, definitely make sure to check the rules that are applicable in different countries. I would recommend to do this via the website reopen.europa.eu/en. This has the most full overview of all travel information within the EU. It's a website run by the European Commission, and it's very comprehensive and will give you all the information you need. Finally, visa requirements. For those who require a short stay or a long stay visa for the Schengen zone, so if you're not a US national or a national of a country that does not need a short stay visa, then you are able to once again apply for these visa online via the consulate website. Our website is listed here on the slide, unitedstates.diplomacy.belgium. And then you can find the page Visa Belgium, which has all the information on how the procedure is taking place. Please check it for the application procedure, which documents you will need to submit, how it currently works. Soon we will start taking appointments in person again as well. So finally, before departure, check with your airline for any rules applicable for the flight, because it doesn't mean that because Belgium is not requiring a PCR test for flying into Belgium, it is possible that your airline does still require one. We are unable to keep track of all the requirements of all the different airlines, so definitely check with your airline in advance. I've heard United, for example, is not requiring a PCR test anymore, but other companies might be requiring one. So it's best to check with them personally. Then check the color code for the USA before your trip. As I mentioned, at the moment it's green, but that could change depending on the way the COVID situation evolves. And finally, don't forget to fill in your passenger locator form within 48 hours of your trip departure. Once again, a short overview of the useful websites this summer for travelers in the EU. You also have info-coronavirus.be, which has all information on the COVID rules in Belgium. Because of course, when you're traveling to Belgium this summer, there are still a lot of rules in place for events, for restaurants, so please check the relevant rules for your situation on this website. And finally, our website, belgiumintheusa.be, which has all the latest travel updates as well. Finally, here is a short overview of all the channels through which you can reach us. As I already mentioned, our website, you have our Facebook page, which is updated regularly, our Twitter, and an email address, atlanta@diplobel.fed.be, which is our general email address which you can reach us on. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. We're very happy to answer them. You can also call us via phone from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., 404-659-2150, and we'll be very happy to answer any of your questions. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Eline. That's only good news so far. I just want to add a couple of comments regarding the PCR test. As Eline mentioned, certain airlines demand it, certain airlines do not demand it. The problem is that even some of the gate agents don't know what the rules are. So personally, I would highly recommend that you still do a PCR test because the rules change day in, day out. We have had friends from the Belgian American Chamber of the South that were stopped because the gate agent didn't know that he or she didn't have to have a PCR test anymore. 2 days later, next day, she was flying, no PCR test demanded. So it is still, I wouldn't use a bad word for it, but it's still difficult to travel because most agents or travel agents or gate agents don't know what's going on, and rules can change on a daily basis. So personally, I would still advise you, make sure you have a PCR test, because if you're flying to France or flying to Holland and suddenly they demand it, you will be stuck in the US. Belgium doesn't demand it at the moment, which is great, but take your precautions. Now I will pass it on to Teri. Go ahead, Teri.
Hello, everyone. So one more webinar, and I must say, I have come to the conclusion that our webinars are driving Department of State policy. So I do have some breaking news for everyone today, and I will get to that in a few minutes on NIEs. First of all, Karl, thank you very much for the introduction. I have now been working with Arnold Golden Gregory for over 30 years. We do have a tremendous specialization in supporting European-owned business in the US, and very soon I will have an announcement how we're going to expand that, that support to European-owned business. So I appreciate that introduction very much. I've also appreciated the Belgian Chamber taking the initiative on webinars on travel ban issues, because in my practice, I've been a lawyer for over 32 years and never have I dealt with the gravity of issues that I've seen over the last year when people are trying to continue to run their global businesses in the United States. People must travel to the United States. It's just not the same on Zoom as it is in person. And added to that, as everyone knows, we have a tremendous labor shortage in the United States, particularly in skilled areas. And so this is the time where business really needs to send very highly specialized, qualified executives, managers, and specialized knowledge professionals to the United States. Nonetheless, we still have the travel ban in place, and we're having to deal with it. And so we're doing our best to deal with it on a day-by-day basis. But as you all know from the fact that the Belgian Chamber has sponsored 5 of these webinars, everything is changing all the time. Everything is fluid. And so you have to get continual updates and understand how to prepare and present your documentation so that you can qualify for a travel ban waiver. And so I'm really glad that we can give you some very interesting updates today. So for many of you on the webinar today and those who have joined before, you know that travel ban policy and regulation has changed quite drastically since March of last year when the travel bans went into effect. From March to around end of July of last year, it was very, very difficult to get a waiver of the travel ban. Beyond August of last year, we started to apply through CBP, Customs Border Protection throughout the United States. We were also applying at the consulates, and typically a travel ban waiver would be granted to business individuals traveling to the United States if we could show that travel would be in the national interest of the United States, which was a very broad standard and allowed us to make many creative arguments about why a particular individual would be in the national interest of the United States. Before leaving office, President Trump lifted the travel bans, which gave great hope to a lot of people. President Biden reinstated the travel bans. And so now we are in a state of travel ban if you're coming here from the Schengen area, UK, Ireland, China, Brazil, Iran, South Africa. So if you're in those areas and you're not subject to one of the exemptions of the travel ban, then you will need a waiver to travel into the United States, or you will have to travel to a non-banned country for a period of 14 days before you enter the US, which has certainly been a tremendous economic boom for Mexico, where we know a lot of folks have been traveling with free entry into Mexico, remaining for 14 days before coming into the United States if you're not eligible for a waiver of the travel ban. There are certain folks who are just exempt from the travel ban, and those would be US citizens, permanent residents, people who have US citizen children who are under the age of 21 and unmarried, siblings of those United States citizens if they're unmarried, spouses of US citizens. So there's still a certain group of people who are by nature exempt from the travel ban. Also students, people attending Georgia Tech who have a student visa, they would be exempt from the travel ban. So there are certain exemptions that have been put into place. That being said, President Biden feels very strongly about protecting the United States and the health of its citizens. And so he has certainly strengthened or lifted the standard for qualification for a waiver of this travel ban. When he took office, he changed the whole approach to applications for waivers of travel bans and issued a more stringent standard that we're having to comply with now to secure a waiver of the travel ban. And I'll get into that in just a few minutes. So everyone is asking me all the time, when will the travel ban be lifted? I'm fully vaccinated. Doesn't that mean, or shouldn't that mean, that I can travel to the United States? My personal opinion, yes, it does. But unfortunately, my personal opinion has not swayed the Biden administration yet. The Biden administration has indicated that it will not yet set a date when the travel bans will be lifted. A lot of people right now are getting involved in advocacy in this area. And I would encourage anyone on the call today who feels strongly about lifting the travel ban to advocate. Call the senators, call the congressmen, get involved, because that, I think, is having an effect on policy. And we've seen policy change in the Biden administration over the last month. And so I can only encourage you, if you feel strongly one way or the other, to get involved in advocacy. So just this morning, there was a report on this on NPR I found very interesting. The Travel Association, the National Travel Association, has reported that America is losing $1.5 billion each week through this travel ban, and is pushing very hard to call for a lifting of the travel ban. In addition, last week, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, of which I am a member, issued a policy brief that's an excellent paper calling to issue all of the problems we're having in global travel, global mobility, applying for visas for foreign nationals who must travel to the United States, and travel bans, calling for a lift of the travel ban. We've heard other people, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, we heard on Face the Nation, indicate that he doesn't really believe that travel bans are effective in curbing the spread of the COVID. So we're seeing a lot of folks out there now becoming a little bit more vocal, let us say, on lifting the travel bans. And certainly we're watching it very closely to see if the administration will take a stance in this regard. But as it is today, we recently had Jen Psaki, Biden's press secretary, saying we have no plans at this time to lift the travel bans. This was just last week. If we wouldn't have put the travel bans in place if we didn't think that they keep Americans safe. So that was fairly recently. Also, we saw Secretary Blinken travel to Europe, and in France, he was also indicating that the administration would not name a date, but it is putting in place certain expert working groups to study the issue. But for now, I think we'll have to be living with the travel bans, and we'll have to live with them for some time going forward, because there's just been no indication right now that they'll be lifted. That being said, now for the breaking news, and literally this is news of a policy change that was just released late yesterday. It has not hit the website of the US embassies or the US consulates yet. So after this webinar, likely you will not be able to find it yet, but it is true. And what it is that the government just announced, the Biden administration through the Department of State, that if you have been granted an NIE, a waiver to the Schengen travel ban within the last year, by the Department of State, that waiver will remain valid for 1 year for multiple entries. I repeat, so let's just say you have applied through the embassy in Brussels for an NIE, and you received that NIE in, let's say, April of this year. Per this new guidance, that NIE will remain valid for a period of 1 year for multiple entries into the United States. This is brand new. I think it's a concession by the Biden administration because they don't have an intention right now to lift the travel ban, but recognizing that there are some folks that critically need to travel to the United States. And if they've been approved once, theoretically, they would be approved again. And so you do not have to reapply. Now, since this is brand new, I will tell you that since 6 o'clock this morning, I have been trying to get my hands around it to understand what does it mean. So for many of you who have employees or people who have applied for NIEs, you're sort of thinking, well, golly, if I got one in maybe December, does that mean that I can just get on a plane and travel to the US and I don't have to apply for a new NIE? We believe that that is the case if your NIE was issued by the Department of State, so issued by one of the US consulates. However, just this morning, Customs Border Protection, CBP, JFK Airport indicated that this is DOS policy, Department of State policy. This is not CBP policy, which means that if you applied for a waiver through CBP, which I know many, many people did, that might not be valid for a period of 1 year or for multiple entries into the United States. In addition, I'm getting questions such as, well, last year under the Trump administration, the consulate found that I would be in the national interest of the United States and granted me a waiver. But subsequently, because Biden changed the rules and made the standard much, much higher, I was denied an NIE application. Is my Trump administration application valid, NIE valid, even though I've had a subsequent denial? I do not know. This is brand new. but it's good. It's a good path forward. And interestingly enough, just this morning, we had filed, I was in the office yesterday, and I had filed multiple applications for NIEs for folks that I work with. And I got responses. I got a response from Austria just basically saying, you know, you had an NIE approved back in April, and now, great news, it's valid for a year, and we've made the specific notation into the system. We got correspondence from Madrid saying basically the same thing. You've had an NIE approved before, and now it will be valid for another year. And it sort of named a date, which was sort of random back in May. But nonetheless, a correspondence came that that NIE would be valid for a year and for multiple trips. I got 2 responses from Berlin and from Frankfurt, both indicating that NIEs would be valid for a year, effective immediately if granted by the US Consulate for multiple entries. I have not had a response yet from Brussels, but I didn't file anything in Brussels yesterday. I can only assume that Brussels will follow suit. I'm sure it will, but none of the websites have been updated yet. This is brand new. We found out because of the applications that we had filed yesterday, frankly, and because of news reports from early this morning from other members of the American Immigration Lawyers Association, whom we appreciate very much, because all of us, whether we're working together or in different firms, we're always working together to try to give the best advice and support our clients the best. So we've got a concerted effort going now to update each other. So this is really, really very much appreciated from all of my colleagues. So that is very, very, very good news. So going forward, it is, well, maybe some of you still have not applied for an NIE at a US consulate abroad, or maybe you've been granted an NIE, but from Customs Border Protection, which currently indicates that those NIEs are only valid for 30 days and 1 admission. And so you'll need to apply for another NIE. I did want to go over the new Biden standards for approval of an NIE, because since our last webinar, there's new information, new standards. And I know the difficult thing, because I see it every day, I get contacted by people and companies who have applied for NIEs and they didn't realize that the standards had changed, and so they were denied. That was a surprise. And particularly it's a big surprise because what we're also seeing is that now, because the economy is just, you know, going so much better, things are opening up in Europe, things are open in the United States, people need to travel here. And so we're seeing a lot more applications filed for NIEs, which means that we're seeing an increase in processing time. So for example, London just said, if you're applying for an NIE, you can bet that it will take 60 days to process it. And we're having some of those experiences right now. Italy has been at 60 days forever. Germany has just announced that it's going also to either 15 or 30 days, depending on where you're filing. We're seeing also delays in Frankfurt and in Berlin, with both post-processing applications. Some, I will tell you, I'm seeing some come back within a couple of weeks. I'm seeing others take over a month. Brussels, the news is much better. All applications are processed fairly quickly still in Brussels. I personally have not seen applications pending for more than 7 to 14 days, although they're also indicating in standard responses that it may take longer as more people are applying. So plan ahead. That's very important, as always. In addition to that, one thing that we are also applying for folks who just simply cannot wait to travel is that there are still CBP posts open to applications, but only under certain criteria. So for example, if you apply for an NIE and it's pending in Brussels for more than 14 days, you can turn around and file that application in Newark, in JFK, or in Miami. Those are the 3 posts right now that seem the most open to receiving applications for NIEs. And so we are regularly applying through these CBP posts when applications at a US consulate are pending for more than 14 days. So that's a bit of a trick of the trade. The requirements for filing with CBP are different than for filing with the consulate itself. And I'll talk a little bit about that, but that's something that you can do if you find that you really need a waiver of the Schengen travel ban and it's not given yet. So, who qualifies for an NIE? Under the Biden administration policy, to qualify for an NIE, you must show that an individual, yourself, if you are applying, or someone in your business, that you must show that you're playing a vital role in support of critical infrastructure or supply chain directly linked to that critical infrastructure. What's new since March? Well, what's new since March is that the Biden administration circa 4 weeks ago opened this category up a little bit to say you may also qualify if you're providing executive direction to critical infrastructure or executive direction to significant economic activity in the US. What does that mean? Well, I don't know. In each and every filing, I will tell you, you must prepare very carefully and you must make your arguments very clearly under this policy. Of course, everyone is asking, well, let's just say I'm a project manager and I'm a project manager in the automotive industry. Will I qualify for an NIE? Well, the policy says you have to be playing a vital role in support of critical infrastructure, or you must be providing executive direction to critical infrastructure or significant economic activity in the US. Is a manager an executive? Well, maybe, maybe not. Depends on how you put your argument. At the end of the day, in every application, you have to have a very strong letter from your company, and it must include arguments how you play a vital role in support of critical infrastructure, or whether you're providing executive direction to critical infrastructure, or whether you are providing executive direction to significant economic activity in the United States. You ask, what is critical infrastructure? Well, there's such a thing called the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Act, nicknamed CISA, C-I-S-A, in the United States. And if you just Google that and go to that site, you will see a list of all the critical infrastructure sectors and examples of what type of business are included within critical infrastructure. So you have listed in the critical infrastructure glossary things like the chemical sector, pharma, transportation, facilities, certain types of facilities, critical infrastructure for the United States, such as tunneling or other types of activities. So it's really important, depending on what business you are working for, that you go to the CISA and you try to find that area that you might be supporting, because under Biden policy, you need to somehow be linked to critical infrastructure or directly linked supply chain to qualify for an NIE. So it's very important you look at those types of things as well. Of course, the consulates and CBP can also grant NIEs on a humanitarian basis. We've seen a few humanitarian grants where folks are in Europe and sadly have a very ill relative in the United States, some really urgent reason that they must come to the United States. So that is also permissible. It's also permissible for public health. And so public health reasons can be another area where you can be granted an NIE. In addition to that, if you're in the national security and are providing national security support, you can also be granted an NIE. So for those of you who like my favorite band, Marillion, you'll hear it in the background. I apologize for that. That was my phone. And I keep it on because I have a relative in the hospital right now. So I apologize that I just also added to this webinar a little track from Marillion, but everybody can use a good track from Marillion day to day. Moving on. As we were discussing, if you do not have an NIE and you don't have time to wait for an NIE and believe that it's taking over 2 weeks' time to secure an NIE, you can also travel through a third country that is not subject to the travel ban and then enter the United States 14 days later. So I see a lot of folks traveling through Turkey, through Dubai, through Croatia, through Mexico, through the Caribbean. And so you can also sort of add a vacation onto your travel into the United States. And there you will not need a waiver of the Schengen travel ban to enter the United States. Finally, to sort of wrap up a little bit, I like to remind everyone about applying for a waiver, not to forget that it's not just about applying for the waiver showing vital support to critical infrastructure, executive direction to critical infrastructure, significant economic activity, but it's also about qualifying to enter the United States. So we've seen a lot of denials of waivers of the Schengen travel ban to folks where you've sort of forgotten a little bit that when you're arguing your vital support to the United States or to a business in the United States, don't forget that there are certain activities that you do in the United States that actually require a working visa, not just an ESTA or a business visitor visa. So you have to be a little careful about how you argue. So when you're presenting your documents for an NIE application at a US consulate or embassy abroad, you have to add to that application evidence that what you plan to do in the United States is also authorized under your particular visa status. So for those of you who have, say, an e-visa issued in Brussels, you're authorized to work in the United States. So you don't really have to think about telling the consulate what you're doing so much as argue about how you're providing that vital support, playing a vital role. Although you do want to make sure that you don't forget what you filed in connection with your visa application. I've also seen instances where folks maybe have, been titled manager engineering on their visa application and maybe submit an NIE as an engineer or technician. Not good. Make sure you always remember the representations that have been made and you follow those representations very closely with regard to title and salary, etc., because that can come back to haunt you if you don't. So that's very important. In addition, we see a lot of commercial workers coming in from Belgium. What does that mean? Well, you are not required to have an official work visa authorizing you to work in the United States if you are coming here to install, repair, maintain, troubleshoot, or give some ancillary training on machinery that was manufactured outside the US, where there is a contract by the manufacturer of the machinery and systems, or the folks working closely with the manufacturer of the machinery and systems, and the company in the United States which has purchased the machinery and systems, which calls for not only the sale of the machinery and systems, but also that installation, repair, etc. So when you're applying for someone, let's say in Belgium, who may have an ESTA approval, authorizing him or her to come to the United States for up to 90 days, and that individual needs to obtain a waiver of the Schengen travel ban to come into the United States for purposes of the machine installation, remember to provide the consulate with a letter saying that you've manufactured that machine, you've sold that machine, and as part of the sale, you're supposed to install that machine. Also, let the consulate have a copy of an excerpt of the contract showing that it's not just the sale of the machine, but it's also the installation of the machine. That is important. And also provide some information about why the particular individual applying has specialized knowledge which would support the installation of the machine. So never forget, it's not just about the NIE anymore. It's also about qualification to enter the United States. And finally, I know that a lot of folks are also very frustrated right now with the Biden administration policy that indicates if you don't qualify for an NIE, you don't qualify for a visa. Well, that's still in place. So what I've just told you about qualification for an NIE will go for new applications for employment authorizations at U.S. consulates abroad as well. So for example, you may have an employee who needs to come to the United States for 2 years to serve as the manager of production or manager of engineering in the United States or something along those lines. And you desperately need that individual here because goodness knows we're just not finding enough engineers right now to really support the businesses that are doing so well in the United States right now in the production area. That person will only qualify for a visa if that person also qualifies for the standard of the NIE. That's something that there's also a lot of advocacy opposing this stance of the Department of State, but for now it's still there. So in each and every visa application we prepare and that you prepare, you must have an argument stipulating why the individual who's applying for a work visa qualifies at that level of the NIE. And of course, that person who visits the consulate to apply for the visa or travels to the United States and enters the United States, you got to brief that person about the new criterias for applications for a visa, for entry into the United States, because you want them to understand also, if they're traveling without a working visa, what they are authorized to do and not to do, how they should express themselves to CBP in that regard. And also when they're applying for a work visa at a US consulate, how to express themselves very succinctly to convince an officer that in fact, they're not only qualified for the visa, but they're also qualified under the heightened standard of the Biden administration. So with that, I will conclude the remarks and look forward to any questions.
All right. Teri, to wrap up from, okay, Teri is leaving for a second. Eline, then I will ask you the first question. Eline,
Teri is
Europe,
back. Sorry about that.
Okay, I'll ask the question first to Eline and then Teri
Right.
can answer. Okay, so the United States at this moment is colored green. Will Europe consider to look at the US as something like the European Union, where certain regions are going into orange or red, or will they still consider to look at the United States as a whole? Because like even Flanders or Wallonia can be different color. I mean, Portugal and Spain, or Spain, certain regions can be different color. Is the EU or Belgium considering to do that in the future as well for the US?
Yeah, very good question. So currently we are only, or the ECDC is only assessing countries as a whole. Maybe if there was a real spike in specific regions, they would consider it, but I think it would be very difficult to enforce that anyway, as it's very easy to travel domestically within the US. So currently it's only assessed at a country level for other countries than the EU. Within the EU, obviously they have these data to specify it per region, so it's a bit different. They have the numbers, but for other countries they just either won't have the data or it won't be very useful to do that. So currently it's only done for the whole US as a whole.
Okay, Teri, coming back to you. There's a lot of people here with L1, L2, E2, E1, you name the kind of visa. I mean, they're scared of going to Europe. Reason why they're scared of going to Europe is application time for a travel waiver takes 14 days, as you mentioned, up to 60 days in certain regions. Should they be scared? Yes or no? You explained intensively what you need to do on the application. But I mean, let's take an example with the strengthening of the rules under Biden. People that were in sales, I mean, sales was not seen as a critical job. what would you recommend to those people? Forget your holiday in Europe, stay here, don't take any risk, or go ahead, take your flight, and you should be able to get your visa?
Well, having lived and breathed this issue now since March of last year, I will tell you that there is always a degree of risk anytime you leave the United States and would like to apply for a waiver of the travel ban. We see changes in this area come out of nowhere. There's no notice. What happened today, there was no notice that this was going to happen. There was not even an intimation that this would happen. And that was for the good today, fortunately. So if you're holding an E visa or an L visa and you applied at the US Consulate for an NIE, and that was approved already, it appears now as if that NIE will now be valid. So you can fly out and fly back in, and it should be valid for the multiple entry, subject to clarification, but it seems pretty clear at this point in time, based on what we're seeing from our filings, that that will be the case. However, everybody has asked, can we apply for the NIE while we're still in the United States, just to make sure we have it in our back pocket? The answer is no. You have to be in Belgium to apply for the NIE if you're a citizen of Belgium. And if you're not a citizen of Belgium, you have to have a residence permit, and they will check that. So I have had cases where there have been NIEs denied because an individual was actually transiting through Belgium, but didn't have a residence permit, and it was denied, and the individuals referred to their home country of citizenship. And so you have to physically be there to apply for the NIE. The Biden administration wants to discourage international travel. And so if you elect to travel, there is a chance that it could be shut down tomorrow, that no new NIEs will be granted. We've seen that happen. It could happen that you're in a situation where we might put forth a strong argument that you play a vital role in support of critical US infrastructure, but the consular officer disagrees. On one of my listservs this morning, I saw a question from a fellow attorney that said that she had filed 6 applications, this being in Berlin, same letter, same company, same event, same everything. 3 were approved, 3 were denied. So you have different folks adjudicating, and you have to try to convince them that an activity should be permissible in the United States. So there is always a degree of risk if you travel. So I might be scared, yes.
Okay, worst case scenario. Your NIE is denied and you fly to Cancun for 14 days and you still have a valid visa. Can you get back into the country?
Absolutely, you can.
So literally, if you have a denial from traveling from within the Schengen zone, you can go to any country which is on the approved list, which is even colored worse in infections. You can still get back into the US, even with a denied NIE.
Yes, you can.
Okay. Then talking about relatives and family. I mean, there's a lot of Europeans. I mean, I know we have French friends, European, German friends, Belgians that want their family to come over. Under the current circumstances, this is impossible, if I understood well.
Tourists are not allowed to travel right now to the United States unless they route through a non-banned country, because they are subject to the Schengen travel ban.
Any idea when this will be lifted?
No idea at all. And based on what everyone in the Biden administration has said as of next week, really no idea at all.
So this will probably not happen in the first 3 to 4 weeks, correct?
No idea at all.
No idea at all.
Last week, they indicated they had not set a date. They have expert working groups, which will make recommendations. But as his press secretary said just last week, we believe that this is supporting the safety of of residents of the United States. And so we have no plans to lift the travel ban at this time.
Okay, now back to Eline. As we have very few direct flights from the US to Belgium, unfortunately, Delta banned most of their flights as well out of Atlanta. Traveling to France and traveling to Holland seems like, the Netherlands seems like the most logical way to fly to Belgium at the moment, or to go to Belgium. For the people that do not take a connecting flight, like for example, when you travel to Paris, where you have to take the high-speed train, you have to follow, or you have to comply to the rules of France and Holland. That's correct?
Yes, that's correct. You have to check. So both the Netherlands and France have a consulate in Atlanta. I'll post the info. I already posted the info for the German consulate in the chat box. But yes, you have to comply with the rules. I think both the Netherlands and France are asking for vaccination status proof or a PCR test, but I'm not 100% sure. I would have to check it myself, as it has been changing in the last few weeks as well. So for those countries, it's definitely very useful to take your CDC card, as I said before. But yes, you do need to comply with the rules of the country you're flying into. So it's very important to check, if you're not taking a direct flight to Belgium, what the rules are for those countries.
Okay, I can add to that. Holland is asking for a health declaration form at this moment. Friends of mine and I myself has also flown on KLM until recently. Luckily, this is banned now. US citizens could not travel through Holland if there had a layover with 8 hours, but okay, Europe is now open for US citizens. In general, Eline, what, let's say, if you are in Belgium and Belgium stays a green zone and you fly back through a country, let's say you fly with TAP Air Portugal and you have to pass through Portugal. Let's say I take a flight New York, Lisboa, Brussels. Is it because I'm connecting through a red zone that I have to quarantine, or don't I? Explain us a little about that, please.
Okay. So the passenger locator form is actually what decides whether you need to quarantine. So strictly speaking, when you fill in the form, you will have to say where you have been in the last 14 days. So the information I gave before is for people who have been in the US for the last 14 days. If you've been in a country that is considered red by the Belgian system, you will get a text message telling you you need to respect the quarantine. However, for the situation you just described, Karel, like just transiting via Portugal, if you're just staying in the airport and you're not going partying in Lisboa for 2 days, then that should not give you a quarantine when you apply and you fill in the passenger locator form. This has not been the case previously, so I would be very surprised if that changes. But that's only if you are just transiting. If you are staying in the country for several days and it is a red zone, then of course you will have to respect the quarantine when you arrive in Belgium. That's really why we are still requiring the passenger locator form to always be filled in before you travel to Belgium, because that's really the document that determines what your status for quarantine and testing will be.
Okay, so I would like to thank everybody now, because we've been 1 hour again with a lot of very good info. I can just tell everybody that Bram, who organizes this, will post a video of this later on this week. So you'll be able to watch it again. You have the Belgian Consulate that was always there to help you. As Eline said, you can reach them at any moment. And if you need legal help, Teri and her team are always available for the NIEs. Unfortunately, I have to round up with the bad news that your friends and family will not be able to come over to visit us here in the US at the moment. And I would say to everybody who is scared about their NIE and doesn't have European amount of holidays to spend extra time in other countries, stay here. I mean, it's sad to say, but if you don't want to take the risk, stay in the US. I mean, if you have to go back for your visa, to renew your visa, you might have to, but I would strictly advise you to not take too big of a risk if you're not 100% sure, because as Teri explained, sometimes it can be approved, sometimes it cannot, like the 6 people from Germany. And I know in the US, we don't have the European amount of holidays, unfortunately, or days off. So I will conclude like this. Thank you very much. I think we'll have around 6 of this because we're not at the end yet. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And we'll see you all later. Thank you very much and have a good day. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Yeah.